Now we are dealing with the subject of what is happening in Pakistan and our response.
Yes.
So shall we start the same?
Yes, inshallah. Hadhrat mentioned yesterday that there is a letter or a booklet.
Yes, yes.
And the message to the Muslim Ummah concerning this thing.
This small booklet was published by us on the 13th of January 1984, about 4 months before the ordinance, of which we have spoken enough. Yesterday I was telling you of the ordinance. It deprived Ahmadis of calling their place of worship Masjid, calling themselves Muslims, reciting kalima, etc. We have spoken of that. But before this ordinance was passed, I had a feeling there was something in the air. Something was cooking. So I wrote a small article and asked some Ahmadi lawyers like Mujibur Rahman Sahib, I think it was, or some others, to just hurriedly go through from the legal point of view and to make any suggestions, changes if they want. But I said it has to be brief, to the point, and it has to be distributed widely all over the country, so that the public opinion is fully educated on the issue. And there is no pressure by public on the government to promulgate such a stupid thing. So this was published, and Ahmadis, with the grace of Allah, are very sacrificial people. You know how bravely they offer sacrifices, and very well organized and very laborious. When they take a task, then they do it diligently and perseverantly. They don't tire. Within a matter of 3 days, the entire country was flooded with this pamphlet. From Karachi to Peshawar, every big town, everywhere. It was in the hands of previously organized group of people, from every class of people, you know, politicians, laborers, small businessmen, big businessmen and things, and people from rural community, etc., officials. They all had a copy in their hand of what was this. This created a very strong stir in the government, because they started investigating who had leaked out the information. It was so precise, exactly what they were contemplating. It was an answer to that. So they were surprised. They said they must have got some spies within us. And I remember reports reaching from Islamabad that they're now investigating who reported this to you. And then last time it was published again after about 4 months on 6th of April 1984, because the demand created compelled us to have a new edition of this. Now this was overmuch. This worked like a last straw on their back, on the camel's back, you know, as it says. So they hurriedly moved through. Before they were afraid the public opinion changes in Ahmadi favor so much, they cannot take an action. So on exactly 20 days after the last publication of this article, they decided that now the law should be amended and Ordinance 20 should be promulgated to introduce a new penal act in the Constitution of Pakistan, whereby all these professions, expressions or actions on the part of Ahmadis would be considered legally punishable. So that ordinance was published, and then we had it translated into different languages with slight improvements, small changes here and there. This is a crisis of conscience for the world outside, English-speaking world. And this is Bangladeshi? No. Bonalimi. Indonesian or Malayan? What? Turkish. Because in Turkey there is a large number of Muslims. They should have been informed as to what is happening in Pakistan. This is Gujarati, an Indian-speaking community. It is found in large number here. Now from this, instead of my speaking in English and translating it, you're translating it into Arabic, you can give a brief account of what it is about and how many Arabs there are in the world, genuine Arabs, who will be inflamed by hearing the portions which you read to them, right? And the last thing which was the last clause in this act was that even if an Ahmadi doesn't speak of his being a Muslim, doesn't call his place of worship as mosque, or violate in anything the preceding clauses which speak of verbal expressions, if he behaves like a Muslim behaves, even then he would be punishable by death and or 3 years imprisonment, not by death.
This is not something specific. How can we say that?
No, this is what it says. This is what it says. Unfortunately, sword hang over every Ahmadi head, because no Ahmadi could behave like a non-Muslim. But I told them in one of my sermons that all right, we'll cooperate with you in this regard to a degree. Already we're doing it, so don't worry. The Muslims in Pakistan are behaving in a manner that they don't say prayers, a law has to be passed, and they are to be punished if they don't say prayers. So we don't act like this. We say our prayers without any law pushing us. And they don't tell truth. In the courts, the judgment, not the judgment, but the declarations of the experienced judges, I've quoted, was that in a long judicial experience in the courts of Pakistan, one judge, ex-judge of Supreme Court, declared that he had not come across a single case where either of the two sides were not lying. Not a single case. I said, don't worry, we will not behave like Muslims, if this is what you mean by Islam. We tell truth, we don't tell lies. So there we agree. You rob, we don't. You steal, we won't. You abduct children, we promise, we won't. You murder and kill innocent people, you misappropriate the properties of the orphans and the unprotected. So I said, I promise to give my promise, word of honor to the government of Pakistan, that this part of ordinance is going to be strictly observed by Ahmadis. We will not behave like the Muslims you are. Right? You see, the main problem with the Mullahs was that whatever they had tried, it could not stop the spread of Ahmadiyyat. And they thought the reason is that they look like Muslims. They talk Islam, they behave like Muslims. So if law prevents them doing it, that's the only way to defeat them. So that people will see they are not like Muslims. So I said, why do you have any fears? We already don't look like the Muslims you are. Nobody can have any suspicion about an Ahmadi not being an Ahmadi, because he stands out in his character of nobility, in his bearing, and his love of Islam. So they're recognizable wherever they move. So there's no such fear. But as far as the lawmaking is concerned, do whatever you do, Ahmadiyyat will continue to spread, and that is what has been happening. No one to stop it. See, Ahmadis are recognizable not only in Pakistan, everywhere. I remember once a judge of a high court in Germany inquired from me the particular question addressed to me, that why do Ahmadis make themselves apparent and known in public? If there is a law to punish them, why can't they avoid this being the victim of that law. Because if somebody lies low, he doesn't raise his head, and the bullets are, passing through over the heads, then there's no danger. So this is our problem. We think the Ahmadis intentionally raise their heads to become prominent and hit the stream of the bullets, the level where the bullets are flowing. This is how he portrayed. I said, you don't know, Ahmadis are recognized everywhere, even in Germany. When you meet an Ahmadi, you know them to be an Ahmadi. Ask your department of immigration where the asylum cases are recorded, they immediately suspect a person who is not an Ahmadi and who is behaving like an Ahmadi, posing as an Ahmadi. It is so universal, this character of Ahmadi, it doesn't belong to Pakistanis alone. This characteristic is possessed and shared by all Ahmadis alike, because it is Islam, because it is universality of Islam. This is reflected on their behavior and nobility. Once, I remember, a high British officer in immigration came to see our Jalsa Salana International. And after that, he came for a short while to see what was happening, because he had so much noise of people coming from all over the world. And so he told me himself that I'm amazed to tell you that my immigration officers can now recognize Ahmadis, whichever the country they are from. And when he inquired from them why, how, he said they have a special bearing of trust, nobility, dignity about them. And as such, they're recognizable. They can always tell an Ahmadi from a non-Ahmadi from every country. I don't say he meant 100%, but a general impression in the department was that they are singled out and they were called, come on, you have come for Jalsa? Yes, yes, come on, go, pass. So this is the state. So this fear was false. There was no need for such cruelties. Ahmadis would never hide themselves. Cruelties are required for the hypocrites who hide under a false cover. Ahmadis call themselves Muslims and Ahmadis together. Not a fool could be deceived. But they know it, and it was just an excuse for the government to be presented to the government. This is the urgency, this is what we need. Because ordinary Muslims, not knowing which one is Ahmadi and which one is Muslim, when they look at an Ahmadi behaving like a Muslim, they think that they are just Muslims. So we don't want like that. They should be singled out characteristically as non-Muslims. And because their behavior does not differentiate them, so we want a label to be fixed. But they are false. There was no need for a label. Every Ahmadi was known for his dignity, for his bearing, for his better civilized conduct. And still they are visible and recognizable as such in the country. See, even they went to the extent of forcibly stopping Ahmadis from performing Hajj. And in this, unfortunately, the Saudi Arabian government cooperated with them. Although in other things, I'm quite sure Saudians could not have condoned these crimes of government of Pakistan or people of Pakistan, because they did not, implement them in their own country. None is punished for the so-called crimes against Islam in Saudi Arabia, for which Ahmadis are punished in Pakistan. Despite the fact that Saudi discipline is very severe on those who deviate from things, and they try to crush him. But never I have heard any Ahmadi or any other person being imprisoned or punished in any form in Saudi for declaring La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, for saying Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, for calling a place of mosque, for calling himself Muslim. Never. But as far as the mosque is concerned, I have told you a few things, and yet some others must be added to the list. You see, they do not read the Quran, or they are so blind that they don't understand the message. I think they're kufl on their aqfal over their hearts. Because the Holy Quran speaks of Masjid-e-Zirar, calling it a place of disorder, of conspiracy against Islam, yet continues to call it masjid.
And do still say it in the
Salah?
In the same masjid, yes. And the Holy Quran, when you read it, it's always Masjid-e-Zirar. They lack the mind completely, totally, or they lack conscience. There is no iota of human conscience left in these mullahs who read the Quran, they know it. And then they say, if Ahmadis call a place of worship masjid, then it will violate the sanctity of the mosque. So if Allah has violated himself and Muhammad Rasulullah, who are you not to do that? To prevent it, I mean. Masjid-e-Zirar, it's a fitna, it's a fasad, do it, even demolish it. Burn it down. Was the instruction to Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah. But still it is called Masjid-e-Zirar. And those who said their prayer there were never prevented, never, from going to any mosque for saying their prayer. So this is Islam, as we read in the Quran. I don't know what Islam there is, they follow. Now I give a challenge. Throughout the history of Islam, quote one incident where any government, any Muslim government had punished someone who was declared as a heathen, as a renegade, as a murtad, punishing him for saying Assalamu alaikum or Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In fact, even murtadeen sought the shelter at the time of Hazrat Abu Bakr radhiyallahu ta'ala. The order was not that because they are murtadeen, if they say azan, murder them or punish them for 3 months, 3 years rigorous imprisonment. Hazrat Abu Bakr radhiyallahu ta'ala said, if you hear the voice of azan, you have nothing to do with those people. You have no right to punish them. What a beautiful faith. What a beautiful upbringing. This is Islam as you believe.
Let me see this.
No. I know where they get it from.
Yes.
The history of Islam is absolutely void and empty of a single example of Muslims beating, maltreating, prisoning or murdering anyone who said La ilaha illallah just for that crime, or saying Assalamu alaikum, or writing Bismillah ar-Rahman. Not one incident can be quoted from 1400s. But in a few years of history of Mecca, you find abundance of these examples. When Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah himself was prevented for saying La ilaha illallah, when Bilal was dragged in the streets of Mecca for declaring La ilaha illallah, when Muslim ladies were murdered and pierced through for the crime, when they were clad in armors, steel armors, and made to stand in the scorching heat of Arab deserts until ultimately they died. That was, of course, a time. They can't find a single incident in the history of Islam, but that is also a part of history of Islam. That should be exempt. There were some people who did it, but who were they? Then there were those who stopped Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah from saying prayer. And, physically obstructed doing it. And the Holy Quran says, أَفَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يَنْهَى عَبْدًا إِذَا صَلَّى. And they stopped people from saying, we are Muslims, and they were beaten and dragged and abused. And said, don't call yourself Muslims, call yourself, that's okay, not Muslims. So if they want to find examples and precedents, there are plenty, but squeezed in the 13 years of Meccan history. They should go over there, but know whom they are imitating. For God's sake, don't attribute these things, these criminal and most dastardly acts to the holiest of the prophets, Hadhrat Muhammad. You can't find a single incident in his lifetime. So go over to his enemies. You'll find plenty of such incidents. Even the demolishing of mosques, Ahmadi mosques, they consider it is a great blessing of Allah for someone who demolishes Ahmadi mosques. They have been totally razed to ground but robbed before demolishing these filthy things. You see, the carpets of Ahmadi mosques were not filthy somehow. The fans and the beautiful chandeliers, other such rugs, etc., somehow the mullahs thought they are not filthy. Only the building as such was filthy, so they demolished it. In the broad daylight, they took 2 days in doing it. But first, very carefully, they removed the unfilthy, holy things from the mosque, which were precious things. But the Quran was filthy, of course, according to them. It was thrown on rubbish. But carpets, no, please, let's remove it to our houses. This is their Islam. This is what they have been doing to Ahmadiyya. Please.
Hadhur mentioned Saudi Arabia and they...
I'll come to
if you Hadhur continued, I'll say...
I'll come to that, please. Now, this, as far as the Arab world is concerned, I don't see anywhere in the Arab world. So far, not a single incident has been reported where any Ahmadi has been prosecuted or publicly persecuted for the crime of saying Bismillah, La ilaha illallah, this and that, except for one thing of which I have a complaint to make to Saudi Arabia. Normally, they are not involved in this. But the Pakistani Mullahs who rob them of the wealth and take their best maximum share in the name of Islam, they are there like flies. You know, and you find so many flies in Mecca and Medina of this type, gathered from all over, to have some financial gains. They have been surrounding Saudi for quite some time, and whenever something happened against an Ahmadi, without exception, without a single exception, it was only these imported Muslims from other places who started the mischief, who reported one-sidedly things, and ultimately when the Saudi government investigated, they always liberated Ahmadis. You see, despite the fact that under some crimes, people are left to rot in their jails forever. But in Ahmadi cases, when it was brought to their attention that these allegations, read these allegations and inquire from the person himself, what does he believe in? He said, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. No crime. While if he had said it in Pakistan, he would be punished maybe for death, condemned to death, but not in Saudi. So that is no complaint. When ultimately they, get rid of these dirty influences, they, honest, genuine people, they say, okay, there's no crime, go ahead and do it. When Ahmadis want a work in Saudi Arabia or want to go to Hajj or from outside Pakistan, there's no problem. Whenever they inquire about their nature, their belongings, I tell Ahmadis that you write to them very clearly that you belong to Ahmadiyya faith in Islam and this is our belief. After being warned about it, if you need our services, we are ready. Otherwise, don't bother. We are not interested in your money. We are interested in honorable service relationship. And they have never been refused on this count. Never. As far as the Hajj goes, unfortunately, there the Saudian policy is not in accordance with Islam. Because I'll give you some details of what's happening, then you'll understand they shouldn't have done it. But before that, I'll tell you, an attempt was made previously when Chaudhry Muhammad Zafrullah Khan Sahib was also invited officially by the King Saud, by King Saud to perform Hajj and be his guest. And that created some problems. Some mullahs from Pakistan incited mullahs from Saudi Arabia to approach their government and say Ahmadis should not be permitted to perform Hajj. So a regular deputation met. It was Saud, before him, Prince King Abdulaziz, who had decided this. I don't remember exact dates. By the way, yesterday there was a controversy as to who reported this tradition. You said it was Usama bin Zaid, and I said maybe, but he's too young. He was too young, number one. Number two, he was born in Islam. How could he say that I wished I had not become a Muslim? But you were right that the matter is reported by him in one of the traditions. But in another tradition it is Miqdad bin Aswad. Exactly the same thing is reported from Miqdad bin Aswad.
Yes, yes, sir.
So it was the second name which I was searching for. I generally quote him because he is very likely to have done this and he could have said it. So maybe there is a little confusion, but about the subject matter agreement held by any scholars. They believe in the authenticity of that hadith. But let's now turn to this. Now, one of the Saudi kings, previous kings, I think it was King Saud, who was approached by the ulama and said Ahmadis should be stopped from performing Hajj. So he invited them. He said, come here and meet me. He said, tell me why. They believe in another man as a prophet of God. He said, no, that's not true. I know that. But tell me, is it among their beliefs to say kalima? He said, yes. They were honest enough. He said, is it among their beliefs to pay zakat? He said, yes. To say to perform Hajj? Yes. He said, then who is Saud to stop them when God has permitted them? And they believe in this. What a beautiful decision. I wish his offspring, the present generation of the kings, had maintained the same stance of honesty and dignity and boldness regarding their decisions. But maybe they don't know what is happening. Rabta Alam Islami, these people, small officers over them, and also imported stuff from other countries, is largely responsible for these mischiefs. So unfortunately, they disregarded this great historic decision of their grandfather, and started actually stopping Ahmadis from performing Hajj. So from Pakistan, no Ahmadi, having mentioned his name as Ahmadi, can go for Hajj. But this is again, I believe, under the strong pressure of government of Pakistan, or the ulama from Pakistan, that they are doing it. Outside, their behavior is mixed. In some places they refuse. But in some places, ambassadors or the visa officers are strong people. They say, no problem. Your Ahmadis, tell us, send us your papers and we're going to mark a visa. And they do it. So that means basically the Arab mind is against this. And wherever they can have their say, they decide in the right direction. But officially, as far as the government is concerned, I believe their policy is not to permit Ahmadis to perform Hajj. Why? There's not the slightest reason. Shirk is the only crime which could have prevented anybody from performing Hajj, but there also opinions differ. Some great scholars of Islam, the traditional classical scholars, interpret those verses which say that it is haram for them after this year to come to Mecca, to come to the Baitul Haram, etc., etc., they insist, and also they related to Hazrat Ali's interpretation, that it means only that they cannot come to visit this place with their idolatrous traditions. You know, they used to make circuits, with naked and perform some idolatrous acts and things. So he said, this is the meaning of this verse. Mushrikeen in practice, not mushrikeen in name. So they should not be permitted. And these ulama have quoted a hadith of Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah in favor of this interpretation, whereby some mushrikeen were invited by Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah to come into the mosque, Masjid al-Nabawi. And as they were entering, people rushed to stop them. You are mushrikeen, you are najas. Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah said, leave them alone. Najas is something which is a quality of the heart. Their bodily presence has nothing to do with that najas. They can come and go. It's fascinating to see him, how enlightened. That is why he's not only a prophet of all the directions, east, west, he's also a prophet of all ages. He's more enlightened than the most enlightened age that man can see.
Just one Hadhrat, with respect to the Saudi Arabian government, they do not prevent anyone and they do not ask anyone if he is an Ahmadi or not. But when they find in the passport there is no Muslim, there is only Ahmadi, then in this case they cannot accept him.
But I'll come to that.
Okay.
This is understood between government of Pakistan and Saudi Arabia that will mark them as non-Muslims,
yes.
And you say you can't. But even non-Muslims can visit, strictly speaking, because the Holy Quran, if taken literally, even literally, only prevents the idolatrous, those who believe in idolatry and false gods. Only they should be prevented. Non-Muslims are never stopped. You see? Now, this is not all. The fact is that as far as the shirk is concerned, if we accept the extreme positions of some ulama, particularly the Wahhabi ulama, and they're all united in this understanding that they should not be permitted to enter the Baitul Haram or come closer to it either, in the vicinity. Why don't they stop these millions of Pakistani Hajjin who belong to Barelvi sect, which practically worships the dead saints? They prostrate before the graves of those whom they consider holy. They beg from them directly blessings which only God can bestow. They beg from them the children, sons, daughters, this and that, and the worldly wealth, and they say, yes, our saint has given us this. There is one saint, such saint by the name of Data Sahib, and he has a darbar in Lahore, which is a court. His grave is called a court, where you can distribute things. And there he is buried, and all the majesty and power of monarchs is attributed to him. And the officials, high officials, even the presidents and the prime ministers and the chief ministers of Pakistan, whether they believe it or not, but to show to the public that this is how they treat them. They go and pay their respect and homage to the dead saints and perform all sorts of mushrikana conduct. They to put things in, all sorts of rubbish, and music is going on and qawwalis are read. All such practices as Saudi Arabia forcibly stopped and eradicated from Baitul Haram and around it, from the grave of Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah and around it, are being practiced around every grave of a so-called holy person in Pakistan. If they had a right to stop anyone, they should have stopped them. You see? They are not stopped, and we, the Muwahideen, closest in our doctrines to Wahhabis, in the unity of God and the cleanness of our practices, we have stopped. What logic, what justice there is?
Yeah, I want to tell Hadhrat that I accepted Ahmadiyya when I accepted because I was a Wahhabi before.
You were?
And they are very close.
So you
to
can
it.
tell them, of course, you must, very close, yes? In belief, not in spirit. Now, in this regard, I have many interesting things to tell you regarding my departure, because we talked our hijrah to here, and it was a very interesting tale of realities. I'll tell you tomorrow. But here, to bring the subject of Hajj to close, why don't they read the Quran again? I think they don't like this book at all. It speaks of truth. They don't like truth. The Holy Quran speaks of the first ever party that was forcibly prevented from Hajj. And that was Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah wallazina ma'ahu. You see? Why do not they imitate him? Why do they imitate the enemies who did it to him? So they should fear Allah. That's all I have to say.